sometimes I feel like I'm the only person who's desperately concerned about the country's debt situation. It's dire, but this analysis shows it's set to get much worse.
Good evening, Corey. Look, I think there are people who worry, but they just happen not to be current politicians. And it's a strange world because essentially both the federal and the state governments are operating as if they don't have budget constraints. So they basically regard any spending as possible and any debt accumulation as possible too. So what's happened with the federal government is extraordinary. They've gone from having government net debt at about 10% of GDP, will go up to 30% quite quickly, and they'll have $1 trillion of government debt quite quickly. But equally, some of the states have gone crazy, including New South Wales, disappointingly. They now have over $100 billion in government debt. Queensland, they've been crazy for quite a long time. They've got, I think, about $130 billion. And Victoria, who were kind of quite good for a while, they've gone completely insane and they've got over $150 billion of debt. And that's just on current plans. That doesn't mean it necessarily ends at that point.
Yeah, it's most alarming. And what concerns me is that a lot of these expenditure, this borrowed money, is being spent on the sorts of things that is recurrent. They're not investments into the future. They're not going to increase productivity, but they're propping up a massive public service. They're giving us a bloated bureaucracy, and politicians seem to think they can use future generations' money to help win elections today. It's really an immoral act, isn't it?
Well, I mean, perhaps I'm even more cynical than you, Corey, because I think really virtually all politicians just love spending other people's money. But in the past, there have been constraints on them doing that. The budget constraint, the notion that, it's not a good idea to be running big deficits and accumulating debt. Now, it seems to me that the view is, including with our own federal treasurer, that's sort of yesterday's thinking. And so they have this view that as long as the nominal economy is growing at a greater rate than the interest rate that has to be paid on government debt, it's okay because after a while that government debt will shrink as a proportion of GDP. But, and that's where you make the incredibly important point, that assumes that interest rates will remain not just low now, but pretty much forever. And if there's any spike in the inflation rate, including overseas, if the economy looks as though it's getting very tight and the central bank decides to slow things down, it is absolutely possible that the interest rates will go up, at which point the governments will be spending a whole lot of money just servicing the debt. At that point, I think it could get quite ugly.
Yeah, and unfortunately it's going to be the ever-shrinking or diminishing number of Australian net taxpayers who are going to have to pick this up. And of course, governments will say, we had to save you from, the awful coronavirus. Judith Sloan, it's all I've got time for tonight, but I really appreciate your time and thanks for your insights. It's very important to get this out there in the public, so thank you.
No problem, Corey.